Sitting zazen, sitting on the cushion, I may wonder about my mind, about my body. Why does my mind, keep producing these intrusive thoughts, these repetitive patterns, or just things disappearing and appearing seemingly at will? Why does my knee, why does my back, my shoulder complain? And what's this got to do with melting ice caps, with seas full of microplastics? Basis of our practice, the kind of root in Zazen, is experiencing our resistance to life as it is, experiencing my wandering thoughts, the pain in my knee, in my back. This is the root, the foundation of all that we do. But as always, it's a question of relationship. Sounds like a daft question, but what's my relationship with my wandering thoughts, the pain in my shoulder or my back? And last time we were talking about relationship being about mutuality, mutual necessity. I can't be unless you are. I can't be recognised by you unless I recognise you. And that the alternative to this, which we endlessly keep falling down into, is some version of the dialectic of the master and the slave. Domination. Struggle. One of the key features of this is that the slave is an instrument. And one of the characteristics of being an instrument is that you're substitutable. The slave literally doesn't matter. They're there to be used. That's their function. The master matters. His will matters. In fact, it's his will which enslaves the slave, which tries to expand to master the world. The slave's job is merely to work, to be formed, to be matter. And matter doesn't matter. It's only will that matters. So the question is, how is my relationship with this mind, this body? Is this mattering? Is this relationship? Or is this an aspect of domination? Is my mind, my body, merely an instrument? In a slightly different context, J. Garfield has an interesting thought experiment, which is to do with substitutability. Can I imagine having a different mind, a different body? Can I imagine having Usain Bolt's body? Not a body like Usain Bolt's. Not that my body was somehow transformed into this perfect physical specimen, but can I imagine having that body? Could I substitute it? Similarly, could I have Stephen Hawking's mind? Not a mind like Stephen Hawking's, but actually that mind with its vast mathematical powers. If I can feel for a moment that yes, not even that that's possible, because of course I know that's not possible, but if I'd like that, if that, if only for a moment, just that, oh yeah, then to that extent, I'm experiencing my mind, my body as something separate, as something to be controlled, to be disciplined, to be mastered, to be perfected. Does this matter? Is this important? Well, this idea of mastery and the way it unfolds turns out to be central to Western thought and actually to the state of the world, to the state of the ice caps, the state of the oceans. Let's unpack this a little. We go back to conventional starting point for the Western philosophical tradition, ancient Greece, Plato. For Plato, reason is the highest good, the aim of life. And in contrast to the world of chaotic appearances, Plato hypothesizes, rationalizes to his own satisfaction, demonstrates the existence of a higher, a rational world. The world of appearance and the world of reality, the world of inarticulate, inchoate chaos, the world of matter, and the world of truth. I think it's one of the great questions within Zen and within Buddhism about how far that same kind of dualism, that split, inhabits the tradition of Zen and the tradition of Buddhism, and how far we in the West just can't read it without immediately, involuntarily bringing in this Platonic dualism. This isn't just a matter of philosophy. It's not isolated from real life, from the real life of the ancient Athenians. Plato's follower, Aristotle, when he's talking about ethics, when he's talking about the good, he takes it for granted that slavery is entirely natural, that patriarchy is entirely natural. This is just merely the state of the world. Some people, some groups, some races, some genders are suited to different purposes. And we create a hierarchy with reason and the most reasonable at the top, and then down through to the least reasonable, to a nature, a matter, chaos. Now, it's just one little example of this, which I think is illustrative and revealing. And that is when Aristotle's talking about whose is the child in a relationship? To whom does the child belong? And his argument, perfectly straightforward and perfectly sensible in Platonic terms, is simply, well, obviously the child belongs to the father. Why? Because it's the father's rational principle, forming principle, which enters the mother's natural chaos, the world of nature, and forms a child. And therefore, insofar as the child, we hope, is a reasonable being, it naturally belongs to the father. And we see some strange kind of echo of this in the myth of Athene, the patron goddess of Athens, who springs fully armed from her father's head. No unpleasant maternal forming going on. And of course, when she's asked to give decisions about who has the right father or mother, obviously she sides with her father and the father, because there is no connection to matter, to nature, to chaos, to the irrational, to the unformed. This interplay of thought and politics, it's not necessarily that one is, well, I suppose to an extent they drive each other, don't they? It would probably be just plain wrong to give one absolute primacy. Of course, thought is driving politics, or of course, it's only rationalising politics. No, as everything, these are completely imbricated. They evolve together. If we come forward to those philosophers who we call the rationalists, with Descartes, you get this final, perfect, absolute separation of mind and matter, spirit and substance. And in doing so, you inadvertently create the classic argument that goes on, rattles on to this day, the mind-body problem, the problem of free will and determinism. If mind and matter are completely separate, how on earth can I raise my hand? What's actually going on here? The mind is a mental process. My hand is a physical object. How can one possibly affect the other? We go through all kinds of gymnastics to try and equate the two, try and understand how they might relate. Different people come up with different answers. But the problem arises fundamentally from this separation, this splitting of one from the other, this dualism. So on the one hand, we have mind, and on the other hand, we have matter, nature. The aim of mind is reason, to know nature, to understand it, to analyse it, to take it apart, to guide it, form it, possess it. So when we're asking about our fundamental relationship with the natural world, how is it that we can come to own something, to possess it? And what's that to do with reason? We don't necessarily have to agree with Marx that all property is theft, because according to this rational principle, the characteristic of nature, of the whole world of nature, so that's mountains, rivers, trees, animals, and insofar as they are natural, beings we class in some ways human beings, to the extent that they lack will, intention, that they lack reason itself, they're there as instruments, as objects, to be disciplined, to be controlled, to be used. And if they have no independent will and intention and reason, to be owned, they can become simply property because they are there for use. They have no other purpose, no higher purpose in themselves. They don't matter. Matter doesn't matter, except insofar as it's useful to the will, to the rational will. So we get this sense of me at the centre, the thinking human being. And through my will, through my ability to reason, I slowly come to comprehend and to act in the world and to take control of the world, to take charge of it. And with Kant, we finally get as essential to his philosophy this distinction between ends and means, an I as a rational human being, with will, with intention. I'm an end. I can have purpose, and my purpose is connected up with reason. On the other hand, there are all these things which are just purely ends. Purely means, purely instruments towards my or somebody else's ends. Now we can talk about me in ethical terms. My behaviour, my desires, my reasoning. But ethics has absolutely nothing to do with instruments. These are purely indifferent. They're purely there to be used. So we can think of the perhaps male Enlightenment philosopher sitting in his study at his desk, being vaguely annoyed by the woman who comes in and demands to clean his study, being vaguely annoyed by the distraction of being brought his food, his coffee, the maidservant who empties his change pot and cleans it. These are not fully rational creatures. They have their instrumental uses. We can think about his coffee. It's obviously grown on estates, overseas, probably in the Americas. These estates are either worked by the bonded, possibly enslaved, descendants of the original inhabitants, if genocide and disease haven't wiped them out, or possibly through Africans who've been kidnapped, possibly bred in captivity, to work these estates, to provide him with his coffee. His shirt, if it's cotton, very much the same, except here, of course, we're bringing the cotton across the Atlantic to be processed in probably British mills. And this is after the destruction of the world domination of the Indian textile trade, which had lasted for hundreds of years. Indian cotton produced by Indians, exported right the way around the world. His coat, his jacket, nicely tailored, is probably wool. And that might well have been grown on the pastoral estates of England, turned over to sheep to produce wool in the various acts of enclosure where the common land, the people's land, was privatised, given to particular aristocrats, other wealthy people, to farm for their own purposes, their own ends. As a result of which, of course, this is one of the main motors of rural depopulation, going to work in the factories to spin and weave the cotton that comes from the Americas. Because it's all stuff. It's all flows of stuff. And while the philosopher is thinking his great rational thoughts, it depends. His existence, his life, depends upon this vast pyramid of actual work, physical activity, flows of product, flows of people. The closer these people can be seen to be being natural, as in lacking the kind of reason which the philosopher since Plato has held to be the aim of life. So that's women, working people, slaves, the mad, children, the higher animals. To the extent that these can be seen as more natural, they're more exploitable, and their labour, their work, their lives, their suffering disappears, pushed off to the background, while in the foreground is the master, organising, controlling. And this is the way in which, in one sense, the perfectly sane, rational tradition of Western reason comes to license, conquest, exploitation, genocide, the existing inequalities, and new inequalities also. So let's just bring this back to the cushion. When I'm sat on the cushion, how far am I? Well, I can start with my own body, my own mind. How far am I in relationship with myself? How far am I looking for mastery, for domination? And what are my fantasies about what I'm hoping to get out of Zen anyway? This higher realm of Plato? World domination, or just domination over myself? Or an unfolding relationship as I come to understand that the whole of the world and the whole of me is nothing other than relationship in its different modes. So is my Zen about mastery or about relationship? And how am I experiencing the pain in my knee? Am I not separate? Or is this a thing? Thoughts in my mind, are these not separate or down, bad thought? As with all relationship, I'm sure we bounce around between mastery, slavery, relationship, everything, all the time. But can I begin to feel, understand, experience these processes in me, as me? And what's the, don't really want to say opposite, what's the other side of relationship here? Well, as I think I'm probably always going to stress, it's care. Not as emotion, care as practice. Zazen as an act of self-care, world care. And care is always action, it's always process, even if it's the action of inaction, as Zazen. But care begins on the cushion. But the question then is how it reaches out into the world. How I reach out into the world. As master? As slave? Or as invitation to relationship?